Are you having a hard time figuring out what to get Dad for Father's Day? You should check out Row 1 Brand's Vintage Pictorum Gallery. They have America's best sports art. With over 7,200 historic sports prints, you're assured to find something unique for Dad this Father's Day. Instead of a boring old tie, get him a historic baseball photo taken by Henry High Sandham at the historic Polo Grounds Stadium in New York City during the 1894 Temple Cup. Or, if he's an NFL buff, check out the 1963 vintage NFL poster. These are so good looking that you'll be amazed how they turn out. Shop now at sportshistorynetwork.com/row1 and save 15% off your order.
On April 10th, 1925, a historic book was published. The book was authored by F. Scott Fitzgerald and was titled The Great Gatsby. It would go down as a true classic of the 20th century. Now, this book was released in the middle of what was called the Golden Age of Sport, and almost 100 years later, this week's guest wrote a book spanning the life of one of the legends of the gridiron that helped put the NFL on the map, and it all revolved around a nickname: the Galloping Ghost.
Welcome to the Football History Dude podcast, where each episode is a journey back in time to learn about the rich history of the NFL. Your host is Arnie Chapman. Football is his passion, and he wants you to come along with him to explore the yesteryear of the gridiron. So hop on board his DeLorean, and let's get this baby up to 88 miles per hour.
Great Scott!
This time as we step off the DeLorean, we're walking out with a turkey leg because it is Thanksgiving Day in 1925 at Wrigley Field in Chicago, Illinois. And we're in the stands now because we're here as part of a sellout crowd to watch the Galloping Ghost in his debut with the Chicago Bears. This guy, Red Grange, I tell you what, this dude was electric. He was mythical. He was the first true NFL superstar, helping put the NFL on the map with his barnstorming tours. And this week's guest happened to release a book not that long ago covering the life of Red Grange, the Wheaton Iceman, the Galloping Ghost, all sorts of other names. But again, the NFL's first superstar. This week's guest is Chris Willis, head of the research library at NFL Films. He is a member of the Urbana University Sports Hall of Fame, a nominee and winner of a Sports Emmy, winner of the Professional Football Researchers Association Ralph Hay Award, which is given to those for a lifetime achievement in professional football research and historiography. Also, for the same organization, he was awarded the Nelson Ross Award for the time that his first book released. And oh yeah, speaking of an author, he has now authored 7 books. 7 books on the history of football. But you'll find out why Red Grange was the one that was the most special to him. And I'll go ahead and leave links to all of Chris's books for you in the show notes and his dedicated page, which, by the way, you can get to the dedicated page for Chris Willis by heading to thefootballhistorydude.com/Chris Willis. Again, that's thefootballhistorydude.com/Chris Willis. Also, while you're at it, I ask that you please subscribe for free to this show by mashing that little subscribe button in your podcast player of choice. That way you get the hottest, freshest off the press episodes, well, each and every week. But before we get back into the interview, I gotta remind you, now, this is part 2 of what is a 2-part series. So if you haven't listened to part 1 first, well, then mash that pause button, go back, listen to part 1, and then let's go ahead and bring it on home. But if you have already listened to part 1, then let's get after it. Yeah, and because it's such a storied organization, we'll call it, you started back in 95 as an intern. You've been there for, oh geez, I'm not going to add the math now, but what's that, 25 years or so? If you could go back and you could tell yourself in 1995 one piece of advice of what you learned over the past 25 seasons, what would that be?
Wow, that's a good question. Advice. I would think that advice would probably be, to just never give up. I think, the thing I enjoy, is that I still enjoy going to work every day. I don't get tired of it. There's going to be things that I don't like. There's going to be things I do like, but, but I feel blessed that, hey, you know what, each day, you have a great chance of like, doing this great work and preserving this history, so don't, like I said, don't ever give up and just enjoy what you're doing, because, like I said, I would think that 25 years will go by so quick. And, but, I'm still fairly young. So it's, I still got some years that I can continue to do great work and to do the things that I'm passionate about. And like I said, a lot of great people I work with, on a daily basis. And so I think advice is, maybe never give up and just keep going. And, cause like I said, it's not something I get tired of. Like I said, even after, almost 25 years, I'm not tired of what I do and the people I work with.
Yeah. You're talking to someone too that it's super cool to be able to go back and look at the history of the game. And I appreciate people like you and others that have helped preserve the game and help uncover the little gridiron knowledge nuggets for people like me to be able to share with fans of the show. And of all that, what would you say was your favorite project to work on at NFL Films?
Okay. That's a tough one too.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know there's probably many.
Yeah. No, there's many. No. I'll pick out two. That I liked. I think the best. One was back in 1999. We did an HBO documentary on Johnny Unitas. And I just thought that was. He's one of my favorite sort of all-time guys. And watching his footage. So for us to do an hour documentary on Johnny Unitas, I just thought it was great. Going back to the footage, and we did a long interview with him, and which we hadn't done in years, with Unitas, and I thought the show just turned out very well and stuff. So that's one of my favorite projects to be a part of. And I think I would have to say this past year, I know it's just real current, but I think because you only do, a 100th season, one time, I thought the stuff we did this past fall, was some of the best stuff we've ever done, or at least since I've been there, the 100 greatest series, the all-time team, those type of programming. I thought we did, we sort of hit home runs. I think if you watched a lot of, the 100 Greatest was 20 hours. It was just a lot of shows, a lot of work, but, like you said, it was all history, that was what I liked the best about it. As much as I like doing some of the new stuff and we follow the game, and the Super Bowl was great. You got some great stars like Patrick Mahomes. But to be able to see us do 20 hours of historical stuff, especially for that top 100 greatest series, I just thought was tremendous, and the same thing with Peyton Places, which was on ESPN Plus. If you were able to watch that streaming, those 30 shows were just awesome. Peyton Manning was great as a host. He's interviewing all these big, great players like Emmitt Smith and Jim Brown, and Don Shula, so to see us do that type of work, I think this past fall, because a lot of it was just great historical stuff, and you're learning about history, and even as much as I have gone through, I was learning a lot of stuff like, oh man, this is great. I think be a part of that, cause it's only going to come around once, I think some of those shows and some of those projects were, just tremendous, and seeing that history come out.
Yeah, I agree. You guys do a fantastic job retelling the history of the game and getting the generation that's nowadays interested in what it was like 100 years ago, and then all throughout the seasons. And I think that it was important to have, like you said, it was a lot of work. I totally get that, but it was extremely important for fans nowadays to realize where the game came from and how it was built. And it wasn't always just taken for granted like it is now. We just know it's going to be honest, the number one sport in America, but that wasn't always the case.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a huge fan of anything historical. So I love seeing it. I love seeing, whether it's us, the NFL Films or NFL Network. I know NFL Network just did a documentary on Fritz Pollard, for Black History Month this past year, and I just great. I mean, we didn't do it; they did it at NFL Network, and it was just awesome to hear more about Fritz Pollard. So I love. Yes, I think the game, just because the game is so popular and has grown so much, especially since the Super Bowl era, it's nice to see how the game got started. That's the reason why a lot of my book projects are all on early days, because as much as I love today and I plan my weekends around watching college football on Saturdays, NFL, on Sunday, Monday, and Thursday nights, I still love how we got started. How did this game that everybody does all their fall weekends and they fantasy football and they're watching the games, they're spending money, and it's such a huge thing as part of the American culture. How did they get started? So I love seeing the history, even like I said, your show or podcasts or social media or websites, anything that sort of brings out why the game is so great. And because I think a lot of these guys who did it in the 20s and 30s and 40s when it wasn't the most popular sport, they weren't getting paid that much. They deserve all that credit. Like I can talk about Red Grange and Joe Carr and Dutch Clark all day, because they're the reason why I care about the game, or, why I work for NFL Films, why I spend all the time doing this, is because they gave me that luxury to be able to do that, whether it's, make a living or, write a book or that type of stuff. So I'm all for, sort of giving them their due and showing the history and where it got started and how it got so big. So, there's still a lot of great stories that have been uncovered or people aren't quite as known, about or that the regular fan base knows. So, even like Fritz Pollard, it was just nice to see that, I think it was last Sunday when it premiered, that some people probably don't even know the story of Fritz Pollard, but he's just like Jackie Robinson, but everybody knows Jackie Robinson, but people don't know Fritz Pollard quite as much. So it's nice to see a lot of the history get out there and people know about it.
What would be the one project that you, like your bucket list project, that you'd want to be able to be a part of that you haven't been able to be a part of yet?
Which way? In films or in writing?
For NFL Films, that is. Like, what would you like to have them have a story on that they haven't yet?
One that I've always thought we should do, and I'm hoping this year will be it. I've been pitching it for years. Is one on Brian Piccolo. That's the one I would like to see. I think if people know the name, they know Brian's song, they know the movie, but Brian Piccolo is not James Caan. Everybody thinks, he didn't even look, like the actor. So I'd like to see us do something about him and his life that shows who he was and what he did and his legacy. I mean, this year's the 50th anniversary of him passing away. So I'm hoping that we do something, a little bit more of a deeper dig and fuller type of show on him and what he's meant, because it's been 50 years, since he passed away. He's only 26 years old when he passed away, but his legacy and his impact is, I think, still felt. And so I'd like to, he's the one, that, like I said, I've been pushing. Hopefully that gets done this year.
Yeah, it'd be good timing. I mean, like you said, 50th anniversary. And speaking of projects and bucket lists, you have many books. Your most recent was the Red Grange story. How did that come about, and why'd you choose that? Yeah,
Red's been probably number one at the top of my list of any type of writing project. But as I was going into some of my first couple book projects, I wanted to do a couple other things first. And so, but always in the back of my mind, I thought, okay, I'm going to do something on Red Grange. Starting like 1998 is when I started really looking into his life and career a little bit more. One of the best things that came about was eBay, which was probably a good thing and a bad thing, because I sort of tried to buy anything that I could on Grange at that time.
Right.
But over the years, that was, it took me almost 20 years before I started writing. So a lot of that stuff I collected and was able to pick up helped with my research. So Red was always at the top of my list. He was somebody that I was fascinated with. He's the first kind of superstar of the NFL and was such a great person too, on and off the field. So So roughly in around 2016, I had noticed as we were getting closer to the NFL's 100th season in 2019, I was like, the light bulb finally went off, and I was kind of finishing my book project with the Oorang Indians, and I was like, well, that's it. That's going to be the tie-in. Is here's the first kind of superstar of the NFL, and here's the NFL's 100th season. So in 2016, I presented that to my editor at Rowan and Littlefield, and she loved the idea. She loved the hook. And then, so that was what got me started. And obviously, when you have a hook like that, it's marketing in your sales. But that was sort of what got me going on that topic. So, and then I went from there. I like I said, I had 20 years of stuff that I had accumulated. Then I did more interviews, more research, took more trips to spots where he lived and went to school and played. So it was, it's my seventh book, and it's probably that and my one on Joe Carr, but it's definitely one of my favorite just because of the time I put into it and the effort of telling his story. I know there had been a few things written about him before, a few books, but this was going to be like a complete sort of definitive look at him. So that's the way I wanted it. I mean, if you look at it, it's pretty detailed. It's roughly like, over 450 pages, almost. So, a little over 400 pages, so it's a real detailed look at him, but that's the way I wanted. I wanted to try to find as much as I could, and I thought I did that. And so that's how that project came about, and why it sort of came out in 2019 was obviously with the NFL's 100th season.
So he was considered the NFL's first true superstar. Do you think that the gap between him and, say, the second most known player of his generation was the greatest of the 100 years, or would there be another time where you're like, okay, no, this guy was like head and shoulders above the rest as far as popularity?
Well, I mean, for me, Red was always, obviously you had Jim Thorpe, but Jim Thorpe's best career or best years were before the NFL was founded, 1915, 1916, 1917, before World War I. And then when the NFL was founded, he was much older, was not dynamic. So when Red came around in 1925, he was the biggest, him and Babe Ruth were the biggest sports stars, not just football. He was the biggest sports stars in the country, So, so when he signed with the Bears and became, a pro football player, there was nobody like him. There was nobody doing Hollywood movies. There was nobody doing endorsements. There was nobody, that wrote, articles in papers. Like, he was the first NFL player that was doing all that. Babe Ruth had done it in baseball, but baseball was the number one sport. So that's why I think Red was the first superstar. Now, the next one that came after him, it took a while because, as you go through some of the newspapers and some of the accounts, there was always, here's the next Red Grange. Here's the next Red Grange. Well, that lasted for a while. There's many articles over the next, 10 to 15, 20 years that said, oh, here's the next Red Grange, where now you get that kind of comment. Well, who's going to be the next, Brett Favre? Who's going to be the next Tom Brady? Who's going to be the next Peyton Manning? Like, you get that a lot, going forward, so, so it took a while, I would say probably, you could say Sammy Baugh in the late 30s. So that was more than a decade afterwards, but I don't think Sammy had the national appeal that Grange had. Same thing with Sid Luckman, in the late 30s and early 40s. Don Hudson did not have the national appeal as Red, although he was a great player. He played in Green Bay, so, that wasn't as, so you could almost say until, Johnny Unitas came around in the 50s that maybe somebody had that type of appeal, even Jim Brown a little bit, but those were both in the late 50s, early 60s. So, so that's why Red is had, and I think he's one of the few players, like when you talk, especially like last year with the NFL's 100th season, if you say, who are the pioneers, Thorpe and Grange are the first two players off your name, off your sort of, who you're going to talk about. Then it jumps to, the 40s, 50s, and 60s, so, but the non-casual, even non-football fan knows the name Red Grange probably. Oh yeah, it's almost like Babe Ruth, or Bobby Jones in golf, like you might hear the name, you instantly know who they are. And there's not that many NFL players from the first 20, 30 years that right off the bat. Even Don Hutson, as great as Don Hutson is, you can almost say he's one of the greatest 4 or 5 players of all time, regardless of position. The average fan or even the non-average fan or don't know anything about the NFL don't know who Don Hutson is, but they might know who Red Grange is.
Even when I was doing my research, I've heard of the name Red Grange, but then of course Don Hutson I had to acquire that name and what the gap really was with him and everybody else during his era.
Absolutely, yeah. So but on a national or like on a historical, like Hudson's name gets lost. He's not
right.
Like I said, like I mentioned, like with Babe Ruth or Ty Cobb, you at least know, oh yeah, or Jack Dempsey or Joe Louis in boxing or Bobby Jones in golf. Like you might not know what Babe Ruth statistically did, or maybe even what his impact was, but he played oh, that's Babe Ruth. He's one of the early baseball stars. Well, football doesn't quite have that as much. Even as great as popular it is today, the Don Hudsons and the Sammy Balls and the Sid Luckmans aren't quite as well known as maybe like a Babe Ruth or a Ty Cobb in other sports.
For sure. And again, going back to why I'm glad that you and others help preserve the history. Speaking of Red Grange, you have a website for the book, right?
Yes, redgrangebook.com is out there. So if you want to look at the book, there's additional information on the website, shows his game-by-game history, a lot more on the Barnstorming Tour, which is a famous Barnstorming Tour that he did when he turned pro. There's game-by-game stuff on there. There's additional stuff about events and reviews and stuff like that. So redgrangebook.com gives you a little bit more background on the Galloping Ghost.
And I guess this is probably a personal, but also a NFL Films organizational perspective. You guys were nominated and then also won Sports Emmys for a couple projects, didn't you? That you were directly on?
That I was? Yeah. I've been nominated just a couple of times. We did an HBO documentary on pro football in the 1950s, that aired in 2001. So I was part of that team that did that show that was nominated. But more recent, I've helped on Hard Knocks. So if you watch Hard Knocks on HBO, our training camp show, this past year was with the Oakland Raiders. That's been nominated several times. We've won, for the Houston Texans year and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers year. So, that's a grind to work on. It's like 6-7 weeks of, every day, we're shooting every day, but it's a tremendous show to be a part of because, people respond to it. People love watching it. Gives a behind the scenes look that not too many shows do. So I love working on it, but like I said, it's a grind to work on each week because you're there every day. You're there over the weekend and, you plow through a lot of footage just to see about an hour worth, but but we've been honored for that show and it gets a good response from fans.
Yeah, they're very entertaining. Like you said, there's so much footage that gets chopped down into small little bites that we're able to consume. And a question that I ask everybody in the show is a DeLorean question. I'm going to give you the keys to my DeLorean. You can go back and point in time any moment before you were born. You can't change the outcome, and it has to be before you were born. What moment in the NFL are you going to so you could be an observer?
Wow. Okay. Wow, that's a tough one. Because there's several things I would want to go to. There's, I guess the two that I would pick right off the top of my head, one would be Red Grange's first game as a pro, in Thanksgiving 1925, the Bears against the Cardinals, just to see him play as an NFL player and see all the hype and all that, just sold out crowd there at Cubs Park, which is Wrigley Field. So just to see him play, would be tremendous. And I would probably, go to the 1958 NFL championship game, to see United sort of rise and, see that overtime game against the Giants, in New York. So So I would pick those two moments to go back in time.
Yeah, a couple of iconic moments to be able to be there in person. And I know that the one, of course, we had on video that we've seen over and over and over, the Red Grange. Is there any video of that one?
There is a newsreel. It's probably like 2 minutes long. So there's a little bit of highlights. The game was 0-0, so it didn't have a touchdown, but just to be there and sort of, see that historical moment would be nice. So, but there is a little bit of footage of his first game and playing against the Cardinals.
Well, we'll see if we can't find that and put some links to the show notes for you. And then, speaking of links, or anywhere else you'd like the visitor or the fans of the show to check out your work at?
Yeah, I mean, the only other spot is there's a website. I don't know if your fans or yourself, Pro Football Journal, is a website that does a lot of historical, looks at things, and, I contribute there, maybe once or twice a month. John Turney's a good pro football historian, runs the site, and it's got a lot of unique, tidbits and, articles that are easy to read. They're kind of quick. It's more a little blog post. And, so I contribute some of my writing to there, of certain historical topics and look back at things. So Pro Football Journal, if you have a chance, check that out.
All right, cool. We'll add that to the show. And with your 25 seasons worth of NFL films experience and all the diving back in history of the game, you have any last piece of words of wisdom for the fans of the show?
No, I just appreciate what you're doing, Ernie. And like I said, anything to sort of, have the history of the game preserved and get people interested in it, whether it's talking about it or listening to it. It's a subject that they might not know about or people they might not know about. So, there's 100 years of it now, and there's a lot of stories that are still being told and can be told. So keep up the good work. But yeah, just plow through things and try to find as much as you can.
All right, Chris. Well, thank you for stopping by in the DeLorean, riding shotgun with us, and we'll catch you on the other side.
All right. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it.
There you go. Chris Willis, head of the research library at NFL Films and 7-time author of books on the history of the gridiron. Now, I hope that you enjoyed these past 2 episodes and were able to, enjoy Chris riding shotgun with us, taking us back, peeling the curtain for NFL Films, sharing with us all the extreme knowledge he has about the history of the game and all the books that he wrote for us. And I'll tell you what, if you enjoyed this show and you think that there's at least one more football geek such as yourself out there that you think would enjoy this or even any other episodes of the Football History Dude podcast, send them to the website. That is thefootballhistorydude.com. And tell them they might as well subscribe for free to this show by mashing their subscribe button on their podcast player of choice. That way next week, when the new episode releases, they'll be one of the first to know about it. But for now, dudes, I'm through if you're through.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Football History Dude. To make sure you're the first to get the next episode, please subscribe on your podcast player of choice and head on over to thefootballhistorydude.com for the show notes and more information on the history of the NFL. And remember, dudes, where we're going, we don't need roads.
We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday's Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.